I'm Diana.
And I'm Zach.
And we are the Farrier's Bellows, a podcast dedicated to bringing you games and tools to take your adventures further.
We're going to be talking about non-traditional indie RPGs, some that have been around for years, others that are newer, to take you beyond the ordinary.
Today, join us as we follow the Magus in The Fall of Magic.
Our first segment is the Call to Adventure. Fall of Magic is a newer game, maybe the newest game that we've covered on Farrier's Bellows. It came out in 2015, which I just am now realizing is
4 years ago.
4 years ago, so yeah, it's got some legs on it.
It's about to start kindergarten or preschool, so yeah.
It was designed by Ross Cowman and comes from Heart of the Deernicorn. It is a fantasy travelogue game. In the game of Fall of Magic, magic is dying and the Magus is dying with it. Players are joining the Magus as they make their way to Umbra, the land where magic was born. What will happen once they are there and what they'll experience along the way will be determined by the shared narrative of the game. This is a game of high magic, of character discovery, of exploration.
So you start this game off by knowing nothing about your character and picking your character name, where they're from, and not really traits, but some
title,
thank you, off a list that's kind of printed on this beautiful scroll that is the game. And so you know nothing about this character, you pick those things, you sort of get an idea for your character, and then you build them up as you move along this map that is printed on this beautiful scroll. As you move along the map, at each location that you come to, there will be several prompts. You get to pick a prompt and you answer the question, or you answer the prompt. There's only a small handful of prompts that are going to ask you to roll a die, and those are going to give you a new prompt. They're not going to give you like a new thing. They're just going to give you a new prompt that you then answer. And there's a small handful that might ask you to change something about yourself or to identify something about yourself. But this game, at its core, at its simplest, at its realest, is question and answer game, essentially. You are given a prompt and you answer it.
It's very much about, like you said, discovery, right? You start off knowing nothing and you discover what's going on in the world by answering these prompts, by exploring your characters, either through monologues or through shared roleplay. What are some things that you like about this game, Diana?
This is a GM-less game. And there are, I think, more and more GM-less games kind of coming out, but I really like this game because it is a nice break for those GMs in your life who are constantly telling stories for other people, and they get to participate in the story this time, while also still getting to tell that story. They still get to engage in that creativity, but they get to participate in it instead of presenting it, I guess, which is just really, really nice.
Yeah, so the only NPC in this, well, I mean, there can be other NPCs, but the only standard NPC is the Magus. And the Magus is shared amongst everyone. Whenever a player wants to move locations, they take up the Magus and they describe the Magus moving to this new location. Otherwise, the Magus and any other NPCs are shared among the players. And this is one of, I think, my favorite GM-less games, possibly because it's so pared down in terms of what people need to share. But that vignette style of sharing and moving around characters just works so well for the GM-less nature of it. I will say that the first time I ever played this game was at a convention, and I know Zach B has run Fall of Magic, our editor, has run Fall of Magic at conventions, and I think he has done the same thing, in which the person who's quote-unquote running the game doesn't actually play a character, but they offer to be any NPCs, particularly the Magus, if the other players ask. And that was how it was run for me the first time. The person who was like basically essentially lending us the game to play at a con was like, I'm just going to sit back and I'm going to help facilitate and answer any rules, but if you want me to do anything, I am here to help. And we basically just asked her to play the Magus every time, and that actually worked out very well for us. I imagine that would not be very fun for whoever is taking up the Magus, like in a long-term game. I think at a con, it's fine, but I feel like long-term that might not be feasible for like a full-length game. I don't know if I would want to just play the Magus, but that is a sort of like GM variant I actually enjoyed.
Especially for a con. I sat in on our editor's game at a con at PAX Unplugged, and it worked very well. I will say that having someone play the Magus specifically, I utilized the Magus more. When we just play the game as is, I don't actually have very many scenes with the Magus. I'll get into it, but the Magus is not the most interesting part of this game for me.
No.
And so I don't tend to use the Magus unless the Magus is a specific person. So
I think that's fair.
Yeah. What are some things that you liked?
So this game does not have a lot of mechanics in it. It's very narrative, and I love that about it. Mechanically, though, these story prompts progress in a very explicit and intentional way, where the story prompts early on are very much about kind of figuring out who your character is and discovering your character. As they progress, they turn more towards very inward questions of conflict and choices that your character has to make and struggles that you are going to face. Mm-hmm. It becomes more emotional. It becomes generally a little more introspective as you are progressing in the game in a way that feels obviously very intentional and really makes this into a game versus a series of vignettes, right? That guided conversation works incredibly well. And it also always brings you to this coherent and satisfying conclusion. Yeah. I've never had a game of Fall of Magic that at the end I was like, it didn't really feel like it stuck the landing. I always feel like Fall of Magic sticks the landing.
Yep. Kind of along that line, I really enjoy how this game is just dramatic AF. Like the prompts themselves, you can choose not dramatic prompts. There's usually a practical prompt at every location, which I appreciate as somebody who sometimes shies away or feels uncomfortable with heavy role play and vignettes. There's usually like, what broke here? Or like the preparation. Like you can just be like, I'm, gathering materials. That can be your vignette and you're done. But even if you're picking those practical ones, those ones that don't, or you're interpreting them in ways that are more practical, that are more like, oh, I do the thing, I'm done. It's still really dramatic. And it's like magic in that I don't know why it always ends up being so dramatic, but it is always so dramatic. And I love that about this game. It is always a very dramatic game.
Yeah.
Even when you don't think it's going to be, it is just dramatic.
The ending always ends up, if not fairly dark, then at the very least bittersweet. Mm-hmm. It is a drama game, yes, for certain, and it's because those prompts sort of guide you towards that. Yep. And I think you probably could resist that a little bit, but there's going to be...
It's hard to, though.
Yeah.
It is very hard to resist. Like, you fall into it. Mm-hmm. You fall into it very easily.
Well, at the core of the game, the first thing that you learn about the game is that magic is dying and the Magus is dying with it. So you are starting this game with concepts of death at play. So there are heady concepts going on in this game. And while at the start you're kind of reveling in the magic and some of like the very... I find this game often gets kind of like surreal magic. Mm-hmm. We've played some games that are very like low magic / like the magic has a lot of rules and like it feels coherent. I find this game works for me. I enjoy it the most when it kind of gets into that sort of like very weird magic, all sorts of different things happening that don't have to be explained, that you don't have to worry about, because that really frees up all of the players at the table to interpret locations and prompts however they want. Yeah. And you don't have to worry about that consistency, because the tone is going to be consistent because of the prompts, but the world doesn't have to be consistent. And that it pays off. It feels very magical, and it feels like something that you want to protect the magic.
Yes, yeah. On a physical note, this game is just very pretty. It is printed. If you have the physical copy, it's printed on this beautiful scroll, and does it come with the coins?
Yes.
Your player is signified by a physical coin, and it is just beautiful. And the game itself gets you in the mindset of playing this very dramatic, this very magical kind of game, character, world. It's magical from beginning to end. I love playing this game.
Yeah, it has a digital and a physical version. The physical version is, I believe it's hand screen printed, and there's obviously been a lot of care put into the quality of the physical game. The digital version is equally as beautiful, but you don't get that same like tactile feel. You don't have the weight of these beautiful coins as you're moving them across. You don't have the actual like physical unfurling of the piece. It is good, and I would love to play this game on Roll20. We have the digital version and borrowed the physical version from Zach B. But to me, the physical version of this game like really is the game. Not that there's anything wrong with the digital version, and the digital version is a very good, accessible option for everyone. I think if you want to play this game and you haven't yet, probably starting with the digital version is probably a better option, since the physical version is so high quality. It is a little bit of a pretty penny for folks who are strapped for cash, but the digital version is very easily accessible, very reasonably priced, right? Especially for a digital version. I see very expensive digital versions. I'm like, but I forget where I was going. It's a beautiful game. It's a beautiful game. There are so many different stories that are going to be told with this game. You might think that with a clear like progression and with list of choices for name, title, and like hometown, that you might discover a lot of this game on first playthrough. But there is so much options, and there's so much room for interpretation with each of these prompts, that your game is going to be vastly different every time. I've never played a game that felt the same to me. It has the same sort of tone, and it has the same sort of structure, but it's never the same story. And that is helped by having a wide plethora of prompts to choose from, and as well as two entirely different branching paths. There's a lot of individual choices of like, do I go north, or do I go to the location north, or do I go to the location south? And like you can make like minor route changes, but then there is a massive fork about like in the middle of the game that completely changes which direction you go in. And those choices help keep the game feeling very fresh, keep the game feeling very original every time you play, and also adds to that magic of it.
Is there anything else that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, there's a lot. I really like that this game easily flips between monologue vignette and multiplayer roleplay scenes. So when you go to a location, you sort of have scene control, and a lot of times a player might just narrate the vignette, answer the prompt on their own, they're good. But it works really well when you bring in other players and other characters and you have a group role play, and then you hit that scene. Both work equally well, both feel really good as you're going, and they just create these beautiful scenes either alone or as a group.
I appreciate that when playing this game because it lets me play with my comfortable level. If I'm feeling particularly self-conscious about my role play that day or that movement, or maybe I'm just not feeling that prompt and I'm not really sure where to go, that's usually when I'll monologue and I'll just be like, I'm going to do this thing. The magus says this. I do this. I'm done. But if I'm really feeling it, if I'm really feeling like I wanted to role play and I really wanted to have that group discussion, then I'll open it up and and usually it goes in a direction I did not expect, which is lovely and wonderful and a nice change of pace. But I always appreciate that choice and that ability and that kind of sliding scale, because I am a player who does sometimes feel like I'm not always super creative, and this is a creative heavy game. And that slider of how much of this prompt do I have control over helps with that sort of self-conscious feeling that I get sometimes. And so I appreciate that I'm able to kind of play with that slider a little bit and play with how much of the control of this prompt I'm giving away.
Yeah, right? Because you might go to a location and you might know exactly what you want to get out of that prompt and exactly what you want to hit. And you don't want to spend 10 minutes on it. You want to spend 3 minutes just narrating this gorgeous scene that you have in mind. Or you might go to a location and have no idea what the prompt's going to mean. And then you can bring in the other players and be like, hey, I don't know what I'm going to hit with this. Do you want to play the Magus and help me? Like, we'll work this out in a scene. Or anywhere in between, right? And it gives you that freedom. It gives you like the opportunity for beautiful scenes in whatever form you want to take. I totally agree with you that this game is highly creative, right? Everything about this game is evocative, and it does this amazing job of getting your creativity flowing from the illustrations of the towns to the names of the locations to the prompts. It's very evocative, and I always feel like I'm not pulling my own weight with this game because my fellow players are always doing such an amazing job in managing to come up with these absolutely amazing creative interpretations of places that I would never come up with, that paint these vivid magical pictures. And then when you bring them all together, it creates this wild world that's unlike anything else, that just feels so good at the table when you get everybody's creative minds working together to create an amalgamation of that. It's a beautiful conversation every time. So, Diana, what else stood out to you in this game?
I think the most interesting thing for me is that this game is not about the Magus. The game starts off telling you magic is dying and so is the Magus. And so you think the Magus is going to play a really big role in this game, but the Magus doesn't. The Magus can. The Magus can be a major character and is a major character, but isn't the main character, isn't the main cast. The Magus is just kind of there and is a supporting role in your scenes. Most of the time that I've played this, I've played this game 3 times, I think. And every time I've played this game, the Magus is a supporting role for everybody's individual scenes, which I think is the best way to play this game, personally. I think if the Magus is taking on a major role, then this game isn't playing the way that it should. But that is so interesting to me because the first time you play this game, you think the Magus is going to be the main character and that you are the supporting role for the Magus and that you're doing these things for the Magus, but you're not. And I find it interesting when we first start playing, if you're playing with a new group of people who've never played this game, the first few prompts, that's how it starts. People will try to bring in the Magus and be like, oh, I'm doing this with the Magus and I'm doing this with the Magus. But as you continue to play the game, people like forget the Magus is there and like, I have this horrific memory of a thing that happened to me, or I have this beautiful memory, or I had this beautiful experience, and it has nothing to do with the Magus and it's all about this character development. And I think that's so interesting. And I think it's the most outstanding thing to me about this game. It is the thing that sticks with me the most when I walk away from this game.
Yeah, the Magus is more of a force than a character.
Correct.
They are not a MacGuffin, but they are a plot element. They're not a character. Even no matter how much you kind of try to make them a character, they are more of a plot element.
Yeah.
And we've gotten some interesting characterization out of the Magus in games we've played, but it is never as important as the growth that the player characters go through.
Yeah.
So, Diana, do you want to approach the Innermost Cave?
I feel like this title is very fitting for this game.
It is very fitting for this game.
Very fitting for this game. But yes, let's approach the Innermost Cave.
What I want to talk about with Fall of Magic is the concept of journeys and going on a journey in role-playing games and how well this game handles it. So a lot of traditional fantasy games incorporate journeys. So much of D&D is based off of Lord of the Rings, which is just really one big long journey. So much myth involves going on a journey. The concept of the monomyth is based around a journey, either outwardly or inwardly. And monomyth has issues, but obviously like that concept of a journey is so ingrained in so many stories that people have tried to extrapolate it to all stories, right? So it's not like journeys are unusual or things that don't try to get tackled. There are even 2 sort of subgenres of games that are explicitly all about journeys: hex crawls and point crawls. really try to mechanize and explore how to get from point A to point B in a fantasy game. You have these big maps or paths, branching paths, that allow you to move from place to place and face challenges and issues along the way. This is a way that a lot of people have tried to turn like Dungeons and Dragons into a journey game by incorporating this sort of extra layer on top of each individual adventure. You can link these adventures in a way that makes it feel like you're traveling. But I would argue that these games, even when you're incorporating hex crawls and point crawls, what you are doing is you're just taking a bunch of individual conflicts and linking them together so that it feels like a journey. It is not a journey in and of itself. It is a bunch of individual events.
I would agree. Because usually when you're playing games like this, you're not really focused on I'm walking to this place, this is what my walking looks like, this is what my path looks like. It's I get to this place, I do the thing. Or on my way there, something happens. I'm focused on the thing that happens. I'm not really focusing on my way to the thing. I'm focusing on the thing that is happening, on the action part of it instead of the journey part of it.
Yeah. Fall of Magic does away with those individual conflicts, right? In favor of looking at the journey holistically as it is. And it does that through a few different means. Probably the most immediate and obvious is by physically laying out the journey. You have this fantastic map, right, that is printed on a cloth scroll that as you are playing, you are unraveling it westward, or you are unraveling it eastward and unraveling up the section behind you so that the places that you have been disappear and the places that you are going slowly appear. This gives you this sense of a trek, right? Of starting at point A and making your way to point B. It gives the game this real sense of space and movement that even if I am playing a hex crawl and I have a big map laid out on the board and I see my pawns moving from one place to another, I don't feel that movement in the same way as what Fall of Magic manages to evoke.
Every movement in Fall of Magic that you do feels weighty. There's a purpose to you moving, there is a consequence to you moving, and there is a meaning behind your movement. And you feel that very strongly in Fall of Magic. I don't know that you feel that. I've never really felt the same sort of feeling in other games that we've played.
And I would argue that part of that weight probably comes from the actual weight of the physical metal coins.
Right.
They are heavy little coins, and when you pick them up and you move them, you feel like you are moving. When you set them down, you feel like you are making a decision to be at a place. I think also what kind of helps with that is so you have major locations, which are typically like towns or cities. And then within those, you have some like sub-locations, right? So Ravenhall has the menagerie, the bridge, etc., etc. When you move from major location to major location, you take control of the magus / the whole group. And whoever is moving from major location to major location sort of narrates that transition from leaving the one place, traveling along the road or what have you, and then entering the new place. So you get this solid scene of transition, which can either be vignette or monologue vignette or roleplay, of actually seeing everyone traveling together versus having a conflict scene or rolling dice to try to make sure you're going in the right direction, right? It's about the journey. It's not about the struggles of the journey.
I agree. I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot. The movement in this game is the game. The movement of this game is the game. And so yeah. You have 2 English degrees. I feel like you're doing a very good job of this. I'm just going to repeat myself. The movement of the game is the game.
The movement of the game is the game. That is a good summary, right? Really. Yeah. All right. I'm into that. I also think that the clear progression of prompts does a good job of exploring this. The prompts are never about No, that's not true. There is some physical conflict in some of these prompts. You can get in fights. You can incorporate ambushes and fights with raiders or monsters if you wanted to.
But I think that is sometimes up for interpretation.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It could say like an unexpected ambush or something, right? But that doesn't have to be a physical ambush or something.
No, not at all.
It could be an emotional ambush or a mental ambush or something. Like it doesn't. That, I think, is a strength of this game. All of the prompts are ambiguous enough that you get to interpret them how you feel they should be interpreted. Or if you don't know how to interpret them, that role play, that gamification part of it will let you interpret it in an appropriate way for the scene.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've only played one game of this that had like what I would consider traditional fantasy, like monsters / we're trying to be stopped by an evil external force. And it was, for me, it was the least interesting part of our storyline. But for another player at the table, it was the most interesting part. And we were able to marry those two interests together into a journey that felt interesting. Have you ever played a game of this with like...
Yeah, when I played at the con, we chose one of the big drastic options that led to us being with a group of criminals that essentially were just trying to like kill us by the end.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, it worked really well. It worked really, really well.
But also, even in that, you are always in full narrative control in a way that in some games makes me feel... Sometimes when you have full narrative control like this, I feel like I'm too powerful. Like I don't know how to handle all of that narrative control. I don't know how to incorporate problems or issues, right?
I get overwhelmed easily.
But I find that with Fall of Magic, since the point isn't in overcoming obstacles at all, then I can incorporate obstacles and overcome them or not overcome them at my leisure and still feel like I'm getting something out of it. Because the goal isn't those individual points of conflict, it is the journey overall. So I'm able to not get hung up on whether or not I am giving myself too much narrative control or putting too many obstacles in my path or worrying about, what's going to make a good story, because the prompts are already giving me that and the journey is giving me that.
Yeah. And we haven't really touched too much on it, but this game is about the party's journey as well as your own personal journey. So when you're having those moments of like, I don't know if I want to have this much control or whatever, like you just tell your story. You tell your own character's personal development, and the story still works really well. If every single person in the party is just telling their own individual story, it is still a beautiful story from beginning to end. Mm-hmm. And if every person or some of the people at the party are telling a more collective story, it's still a beautiful story from beginning to end. Like you can, as you get to play with the role play lever, a little slider, you get to play with the collective individualistic narrative slider as well as you play this game, which helps, I think, for not feeling overwhelmed when you have complete control over the story while you're speaking. Like that is overwhelming, especially for people like me, like I said, who sometimes get a little nervous about stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Being able to just be like, well, I'm not telling everybody's story. I'm just telling mine. And I'm answering the prompt for my character in this way. And that's just it. It takes some of that pressure off and it makes it much more enjoyable and a lot less stressful.
Yeah, this game is giving you control and taking away control in the best ways, mm-hmm. in ways that I find very conducive to creativity.
Yeah.
And I think that what is cool about this game and what I consistently find when I play this game is even if you are telling your own character story and you're kind of focusing on your own character's inward and external journey, elements are going to start getting repeated or reflected, or you're going to find parallel storylines and parallel issues across all the characters in a way that feels very satisfying by the end. Your individual characters, even if you never have a scene with them, they are going to resonate off each other in a way that feels satisfying. And I think part of that is just the nature of the conversation that's happening at the table. I also think it's a nature of these clear progression of prompts at the different locations that are encouraging you to do that kind of stuff, or encouraging you to tell this kind of story. It's a mixture of this very bird's eye view look at the journey at hand, as well as asking you to dig in and get microscopic at just the right moments with just the right nudges, that you never feel lost or adrift. You never feel like you don't have somewhere to go. And if you ever do, it's very easy to bring other people in to right the ship again. It works so well because of its mixture of macro and micro in a way that, because you can't get that out of some other games, the journey doesn't feel holistic like it does in Fall of Magic. What do you think about this game for new players, Diana?
I'm not 50-50 yes and no. I am definitely more of a yes, this is an appropriate game for new players, than a no, this is not an appropriate game for new players. I think, yes, this is a new game for new players because there's no mechanics. There is, you answer the questions. That's it. Mm-hmm. But this game can be very intimidating for people who don't feel like they are creative thinkers, or people who don't feel like they're good at thinking on their feet. It is an intimidating game, but I think for all of the reasons that we've already talked about, this game tries to overcome that intimidation and to overcome that, or at least to make it a little easier, at least to make it a little less intimidating for those players who may be a little bit more nervous or might be a little bit less confident in their ability to think on their feet and be creative. So I do think that this is a game that would be appropriate for new players. And I think this is a really fun game to play with new players, because I have found with myself that I am always surprised by how creative I am with this game. I am always catching myself off guard and being like, oh shit, that was a really good idea. I'm really glad I thought of that. That was a really good prompt. Oh my gosh, I just saw this prompt and I think I am making a connection between the last prompt. I think this is going to be really good. I'm really excited. And so I think that this is a really good game to kind of start people with, but it is an intimidating game. So it might be hard to get new players to buy into it. Like, to buy into trying to play this game. Do you know what I mean? Once they start playing, I think it's smooth sailing. I really do. But to get them to say yes to play the game is where I think the intimidation comes into. Yeah,
I think the simplicity of it is an easy sell. But then once you turn around and actually start having to answer prompts, that could be intimidating. But I think this game gives you enough support to make you feel like a storyteller by the end.
Absolutely.
Right? And just like you said, like, you start seeing connections between prompts. You start seeing connections between elements that you've introduced and how you can bring them in again, or how you can toy with them or do something interesting. And there is enough randomness in the game that you're going to make connections that feel important and interesting and cool. And I think the randomness and the choice, the mix of randomness and choice, does a good job of bringing that all together.
I agree.
Yeah.
100%.
I also think, like you said, the GM-less aspect of it. This might be one of the most new player-friendly GM-less games we've played in a long time.
Yeah. There really is no reason to, like, no one needs to know the rules better than somebody else, because the rules are you answer the question.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I find that sometimes with GM-less games, there's always somebody who knows the rules better, so they end up kind of becoming the GM. Mm-hmm. But the rules are you answer the question. Like, that's the rules. There's no reason for someone to feel like they have to take on the GM or be the Magus. Like, you don't have to for this game.
Yeah.
I really do think that this is a good new player-friendly game. I just worry about that intimidation, because I myself get intimidated when I play this game. I always start this game off playing a very different character than I end up playing this game.
Yes. And that is, I think, maybe a question that I have about this game, going back to it, is how to lean into your character earlier to get them, if there's a way to get more out of your character's story. Because I always find playing this that I don't know who my character is until about halfway through, and then I suddenly kind of feel locked into some things.
Yeah.
I think possibly good advice for that would be to just let it go and let it happen. And if elements that you introduce don't end up hitting, then that's fine, and you don't stress out about making sure that something that you introduce in an early scene plays through to the end. Feel comfortable dropping stuff, and that you don't ever have to feel committed to something. There's no reason why you can't retcon stuff. I find I usually end up retconning at least one thing by the end of the game that I introduced at the very, very start of the game, discovering, oh, wait, no, I don't like that. That's going to restrict me in the ways that I'm not interested in. So in all, it all just kind of comes together to create this, like I said, it makes you feel like a storyteller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of stories, Diana, should we return with the Elixir?
This is my favorite segment, yes.
Okay. What are some other books, movies, games, and or music that would inspire or also explores these ideas?
I have never, ever suggested music. I should work on that, actually.
Me neither. I think I have once. And I should more because I make a playlist for every one of these games that we play. I make a Spotify playlist. So
they're always very impressive too. Like the music is usually on par.
Oh, thank you.
Except for like the one time that like somebody starts like yodeling or like screaming in metal, but that's just like one song, and then the rest is all on par. Back on track. Return with the Elixir. The things that I'm going to talk about. Here we go. Lord of the Rings. We already talked about that. But it's just such a classic example of a journey and of the journey being the story, but also personal journeys within that larger journey. Mm-hmm. Lord of the Rings is just a really, really good example of that. Gandalf is the Magus, Obzies, and then the rest of the ensemble is the rest of the ensemble. I could go on, but I will not, because last time I did, I got stuff wrong, and it's been a long time since I read Lord of the Rings, and I don't want to do that. So, off to the next one. Big Fish. It's a movie. It had Ewan McGregor in it. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. But this movie, Big Fish, is about a son who discovers himself and his father through the seemingly ridiculous stories that this father is telling his son as he's essentially on his deathbed. And these stories are ridiculous, like fantastical, not possible stories. So the movie follows this father and this son through the father's stories. And you're kind of following the timeline of this dad. And it's so interesting. And I think it does Fall of Magic in a more lighthearted kind of way. It feels a little bit more silly. It feels a little bit more lighthearted. But it tells you these stories, these fantastical, phantasmal stories, but you're also learning about the son and he's growing, and you're learning about the dad and he's growing as a person, and they are different people from who they were at the start of the movie. And there is a sad ending, but maybe it's not sad. Maybe it's a bittersweet ending, or maybe it's a happy ending, depending on how you want to interpret it. And so I think Big Fish is really, really, really good inspiration for this. Plus, it's just a good movie. You should watch it. Another good movie is Almost Famous. Very different tones. Very different movies.
Yeah. This is, I think, the one that interested me the most when I saw it on our notes.
This one is so Almost Famous is a story about a kid. I think it's based on a true story, actually. But it's based on a kid who essentially goes on tour with this rock band and writes about them. He's a music journalist. He becomes a music journalist for this rock band. And it is a story about his growth as a young teenage boy to slightly more mature teenage boy, and it is a story of his growth and his, personal development. But it's not really. It's a story about all these other people that he's encountering and the growth that they're going through and the trials that they're going through. And it just felt so much like how the Magus isn't the main character, how the Magus is a supporting power or role or force within these other people's lives. And that's a lot what this kid is in this movie, or how Penny Lane is in his life. And so it's also just a really good movie. So like, you guys should watch it. Now, I'm saying it's a really good movie. It has been a number of years since I've seen it. So if it's problematic, don't blame me. But like, I remember really enjoying this movie, but it really does connect with me about journeys and personal journeys, and how personal journeys affect larger journeys, and how larger journeys affect personal journeys, and how somebody who should be the main character isn't, and how they are, but they are because they're affecting you. Those are my recommendations, and I think they're all great, and you should watch all of them.
They are solid. I have seen Almost Famous, and it's been a long time. You showed it to me when I think we first started dating.
It was one of my favorite movies for a very, very long time.
I can definitely see Big Fish.
It's got that fantasy element. Almost Famous has no magic. It's just like a sad real life story with some like drug stuff in it. Like, but it's about the journey. Mm-hmm. And I was going for things that reminded me of journeys. And Almost Famous is absolutely about a journey. It is Penny Lane's development. It is the band's development. It is this writer's development. It is all about personal character growth as well as large ensemble character growth. End of rant. What about you? What are some books, movies, games, music, whatever that kind of hit for you?
So a television recommendation I would make for this, or to help kind of, I think, guide your concept of this, might be Avatar: The Last Airbender.
So good. It is the perfect recommendation for this.
Right? With Aang as the Magus. Mm-hmm. This leans a little bit more towards the, since it's a television show, you have a packaged conflict every week, but it is still about one character who is like very powerful, who needs to get to a place, travel the world, do something, and the group of people that band around them. And there are plenty of episodes that deal with those outside characters, like the secondary characters' stories and their growths, and the way that knowing Aang has affected them and altered their course and their stories. Possibly the biggest example of this being Zuko, who starts off as a villain and then like slowly reforms and turns around to help Aang after discovering himself and discovering the value within himself.
Mm-hmm. He's still OTP for me.
With Katara?
Obviously.
Yeah.
They are the one true pair, and they should have been paired, and I'm still angry that they weren't. They were the one true pair.
Nickelodeon is cowardly.
I mean, obviously.
I also put Disc 1 of Final Fantasy VII.
I'm going to need you to explain.
So, in Final Fantasy VII, you meet a character named Aerith, who is, you discover, a member of a race of ancient peoples. And in Disc 1, you are leading her to her, like the city of the ancients. And you have this massive map that you are kind of traveling along, meeting people, having encounters, engaging in all these stories, while simultaneously trying to protect and get Aerith to her ancestral homeland. And just that process of that journey and the characters like getting to know one another and bonding together in certain ways, and the process of getting there feels very reminiscent of Fall of Magic to me. The end of that journey is also very reminiscent of Fall of Magic to me. Mm-hmm. And although this game came out in like 96, I will not spoil that.
I'll just have to listen to a different podcast for that.
And two different role-playing games are very in line with Fall of Magic. If you are interested in that sort of journey vignette style storytelling game, which The Road to Lindisfarne is a game that we have previously covered on Farrier's Bellows. This is another travelogue game that's sort of similar to Fall of Magic. You are going from location to location. You have you have prompts for each location that guide your role playing, which is a little different in that it is significantly darker, yes. Not bittersweet, nope. Just dark.
Yep.
And you have pre-generated characters, and you're kind of exploring their relationship as you go along this journey through the lens of these set characters and their relationships. You still get a lot of variety in that story. It doesn't give you the sense of travel as well as Fall of Magic does, but it definitely gives you this very solid vignette style character drama that I think is very in line with Fall of Magic. There is also Alex Roberts' recent game For the Queen, which is another game of traveling that you receive prompts and you don't know who your character is. You discover them through the prompts that you receive while journeying alongside a nameless or a
personality-less queen. That's
yes.
Like that part of the journey is discovering who the queen is as well as discovering yourself.
Yes, and the queen is more of a force than a character in their own right.
That's such a good recommendation.
Right?
Yeah. For the Queen is played with a deck of cards. On your turn, you turn over a card. It has a prompt.
You are playing knights who are in love with a queen who is going on a journey to a diplomatic journey. And at the end of the game, the queen is going to be attacked, and you have to decide whether or not you are going to protect her. This is another vignette game that can be done purely through monologue or through roleplay scenes. It is a journey game, but it doesn't really explore the journey at all. You do there are a few prompts in the deck that are about like locations and are about kind of the trek itself, but you are not getting the same progression of story as you are in Fall of Magic, but you are sort of, it follows the same idea of learning about your character through questions and learning about their relationship to this massive, larger than life character that everyone else sort of orbits around.
What kind of story would you like to tell with this game?
Well, for the longest time, I wanted to play a game where the Magus was a young child, because our Maguses almost always inevitably end up being older women. And so I wanted to play a game with a young child, and we did that. So now I don't know what I want from this game.
Well, I have two to make up for it, so don't you worry. So the first is, I would really like to actively try to tell a happy, upbeat story with this game. I don't even think it's possible.
I think it is.
With the prompts that you're given. Just because I think that they kind of tend towards the dramatic. But I want to actively make that like effort to try to tell a happy, upbeat game, just to see if it's possible and to see if you still kind of, if everything hits the same way, if you're trying to tell a sugary, sweet story, you know? But as we were going through this podcast, I kind of just realized, I wonder what kind of story you would get if you played this game as a way to create characters for another game, as like a character creation backstory, background creation for another game. I wonder what kind of story you would tell if you knew that your personal character was going to end up in this location because you're going to play Dungeon World or you're going to play Inspectors or something, right? Like
Inspectors?
I don't know. I was just trying to think of another game that we've played for this podcast, and I don't know why Inspectors was the one that came to mind, but it was. Poisoned might be better. I don't know.
Oh my gosh, all of it.
No, these are bad examples. It just is what it is. But like, if you know that that's where your character is going to be, you know your character is going to be a thief in a Dungeon World game, right? Like, if that's where you know your character is going to be, how do you play this game? How does that game play? How does it hit? And does it make your Dungeon World character that you're, and I don't know why I'm going with Dungeon World, but that's what I'm going with.
I mean, it's fantasy.
Yeah, like, how does that influence the player that you play for that game?
Yeah, that's
the game that you play for that. Like, if you played this game as character creation for that game, how would it affect both games?
I would try it. The last game we played of this, I definitely was not satisfied. Like, it's not that I wasn't satisfied. I was 100% satisfied. I wanted more from the characters. Yeah. Like, I was so excited by the end of our Fall of Magic game. I was just like, I want to see more of these characters. Right. They're so interesting. They have so much story to give.
Right. Like, I would definitely play the character that I created at the end of our Fall of Magic game. Like, I would play her in a different game. I would play her forever. She might be on my list of favorite characters I've ever played, and I've played a lot of characters. Like, I really enjoyed her, mainly because I like the potential that could be for her.
Yeah.
Because this game, you grow these characters, but they're not final at the end. Like, a new life for them begins, or something. So, like, there's more there that you don't get to explore with this game, and I think that would be really interesting.
I will say, as a final endorsement, and you made me think of this, some of my favorite characters I've ever played have come from Fall of Magic games. Like, just ever.
Yeah.
The characters that I've played through Fall of Magic have had such a massive impact on me, and I feel so emotionally connected to them that just with this short game that can be played in a one shot, I have created some of the most interesting and impactful and emotional characters of any other game I've ever played.
Right. Which is why I think it'd be interesting if we use this for character creation and then use those characters in another game.
Yeah. I would try that.
I think it'd be interesting.
I'd give it a shot. I'd see how that goes.
Yeah. I mean, you're just making the backstory, and that's really all you're doing. But anyway.
I think my only pushback is that you might lose some of the magic.
I think you do.
But I think you do. But you trade that off for a continued story. Yeah. And I think that's just part of the trade-off.
Yeah.
I would try it. I'd still try it.
Yeah. Yeah. If any of you do try it, let us know.
For sure. Is there anything else that you want to talk about with Fall of Magic?
It is a very simple game. It is not hard to understand. And truthfully, it's not hard to play. But it is a complex game that will hit you in the feels.
It will.
And if you get the chance to play it, you should play it.
The first time I ever played this game, I cried.
Yeah.
And I don't know what other games I've had that reaction to.
Yeah.
The Fairies Bellows is a production of The Gauntlet. You can find us on Twitter at GauntletRPG. You can find us on our website at gauntlet-rpg.com, and we are on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet, where you can contribute to The Gauntlet and support more great shows like ours. Also, make sure to check out the forums at forums.gauntlet-rpg.com. We put up a new thread for every episode, and we would love to hear from you on the forums about Fall of Magic or the Fairies Bellows.
Thank you so much to our editor, Zach B., for making this sound reasonable. Also, find us on iTunes. Please, please, please rate and subscribe to us there. We would really, really appreciate it.
You can follow us on Twitter at Fairies Bellows. Talk to us and talk about us. We would love to hear your thoughts on the show and on the game. You can find me on Twitter at ZWGarth.
And me at ICDiana. Until next time, you cannot dream yourself into a character. You must hammer and forge yourself one.
Remember to always head for the glow.